The South Dakota Attorney General Jason Ravnsborg was driving home from a GOP fundraising event on Saturday night when he was involved in an accident. He hit something, he pulled his vehicle over, called the police, who showed up, they looked around, and Jason went home. Now, the next day, he went back to the scene thinking that he hit a deer, and when he was looking along the side of the road, he found, in fact, he did not hit a deer. He hit a pedestrian named Joe Boever, who was hit and killed. And so Jason, the Attorney General for the state, the lead prosecutor, is now coming under some fire. People are asking questions about the investigation that took place and whether there was any misconduct or any malfeasance on behalf of Jason, the Attorney General. We're talking about these two individuals. On the left is Jason Ravnsborg, who is the Attorney General for South Dakota. And on the right, we have Joe Boever, who is the man who was hit and killed and who is no longer with us. May he rest in peace. Now, this story comes from the Washington Post, and it was written by Katie Shepard. Katie Shepard says that South Dakota's Attorney General said he thought he hit a deer. The next day, he found a man's body in a ditch. In her article, she writes that the South Dakota Attorney General Jason Ravnsborg was driving home from a GOP fundraiser in Redfield, South Dakota around 10:30 p.m. Saturday when his Ford Taurus hit a large figure in the dark. He phoned the Hyde County Sheriff's Office to report he thought he had hit a deer. But the next morning when he went back to check, he said he found a man's body lying dead in the ditch along Highway 14 near the scene of the accident. Officials identified the victim as 55-year-old Joseph Boever of Highmore, South Dakota, at a news conference on Monday, and the governor said that the South Dakota Highway Patrol, along with the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation, they are going to be responsible for heading up the investigation as this case continues to unfold. And so we need to sort of ask some questions about this case, right? Anytime an attorney general who is the head prosecutor, the chief law enforcement official of a state, is in close proximity to some potential criminality, people are going to be looking at this with a heightened sense of scrutiny. So that's what we're going to be doing here. What we do on this channel is watch the watchers. We want to make sure that they're going through the same procedures, they're getting the same experience with law enforcement and justice that you or I would otherwise face. And let's see if that happens here. So let's break this down a little bit further. What was actually going on in this case? What was Jason Ravnsborg doing? Well, on September 12th, 2020, from 5 to 8:30, he was attending the Spink County 2020 Lincoln Day dinner. It's a fundraising event. This comes from the South Dakota GOP website. You can see here, I took a screenshot from the event page itself, and they are asking the Spink County Republicans to join them down here at the Rooster Bar and Grill in Redfield, South Dakota. And this event is going to take place, if you look up here, from 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. So on September 12th, which is a Saturday night, the event is going to start at 5. Dinner is going to be had at 6:30. It's going to end at 8:30 p.m. $50 in advance enters you into a raffle to win this firearm right here, which is a Donald Trump Make America Great Again firearm, which would be a nice addition to anybody's firearm collection. So Jason Ravnsborg is attending this event. He's there, and he's presumably doing what politicians do during an election season. He is fundraising, he's glad-handing, he's meeting voters, and he's having face-to-face is with them all so that he can enlist their support as he needs it. Now, he was at the Rooster Bar and Grill, which is this event, this location here. You can see that it's got some good reviews. Does not have a website. Rooster's Bar and Grill, 39 reviews, most of them good. We have a review from Dee Dee, who left this publicly, said, stop by for a drink while passing through the town. Gal behind the bar, very awesome, good conversation, and so on and so forth. You can see it's located in a sort of a rural suburb in South Dakota, not a lot of activity around it. This is a picture from inside the building. I blacked out this individual's face, but this is a public picture that is on Google Photos. But you can see here, it does look like a nice hall to do some fundraising. You've got some rows of seating, you've got some TVs, and so you can certainly make some good political speeches, and you can have some good momentum in a building like that. Now, when we're going through the facts, let's take a look at the map. We want to see how this whole thing sort of happened as Jason Ravnsborg was driving home or driving away from the Roosters location. So this is where Roosters is located in South Dakota. And you can see that this is sort of, there's not a lot here, right? There's not a lot of cities. There's not a lot of houses or streets or urban development. This is very suburban. It's very rural areas. And so we're going to notice that Jason Ravnsborg is actually leaving this center here, and he's traveling back this way down Highway 14, heading back towards Pierre, which is a bigger city in South Dakota. So he's coming this direction. And when we actually map it out, we can see that it would take him about an hour and 6 minutes to get from the Roosters Bar and Grill to over here, which is in Highmore, a town called Highmore, which is really where the accident happened. It actually happened just a little bit past Highmore. So presumably this is the route that Jason Ravnsborg was driving. And as soon as he was heading westbound on the 14, that's when the accident occurred. He hit the pedestrian who later died. He must have pulled over and sort of laid around in this area for a certain period of time. And that's essentially all that we know about this. I mean, there's not much more information there because this happened on Saturday night. The accident occurred on that particular night. Then on Sunday, Jason and his chief of staff or somebody from his campaign, they went back to the scene, and then the investigation started. And so we have a new statement that was just released late last night or late yesterday on Monday, so just 2 days after the actual accident, from Jason Ravnsborg. So as this story was unfolding, as it was developing, we started seeing the news articles come out, and we started seeing people having just comments all over the place. This is shady. This is malfeasance. This is a conspiracy. This is a cover-up. They're trying to whitewash this thing. And so Jason Ravnsborg actually came out. He's the Attorney General, and he released a public statement. This is something that a lot of the time they don't do. They like to always defer and say that, well, we're just going to wait until the investigation concludes. I've got no comment. I have full faith and belief in our team, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. Until that time, I'm not going to say anything. And Jason Ravnsborg certainly does that. There's a lot of language in his letter, in his public statement that we're going to get into that. He's doing that. He's saying, I'm going to give you this statement and this statement alone. But he does provide some additional details and some additional facts that we can start to analyze and we can run through and we can, say whether they're credible or not. And we can sort of dissect them a little bit if they merit that. But this is really this is the type of case that people are going to look at it and they're going to see what they want to see. It's sort of like a Rorschach test where you look at those ink blot tests and you see sort of what you want. Somebody may see a bat like Batman, and somebody may see, a nice elephant or might see a stuffed animal, depending on what you're looking at. So this is kind of one of those cases. You can read the facts, you can look at it and say this was an innocent accident, and this is nothing to be concerned about. There's no fire here. We may see some smoke, but there's no fire. Other people on the other end who are a little bit more, I would say, distrustful of law enforcement, a little bit skeptical of the standard narrative that we always get, may see some areas where there could have been some misconduct or some malfeasance, but without more evidence, it's going to be totally open for interpretation. It's open to people's opinions at this point in time because the only evidence that we have is Jason Ravnsborg's statement. And we're going to get a police report. We're going to get more information. Presumably there's going to be additional details if they're going to actually investigate this case. But there will be more forthcoming. But until that time, let's dive through what we do know and what we do have. So here we have let me swap over here. Here we have the statement from the Office of the Attorney General. This is Jason Ravnsborg. This is his public statement. And he is saying, I'll read this in the entirety because it's not super long. He says, as reported by many news outlets, I was involved in an accident on Saturday, September 12th. That tragically involved a pedestrian who was walking on a highway. I have not made a statement before now because the matter is being investigated by the South Dakota Highway Patrol and the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Quick note on that. Anytime that there is a situation like this where the attorney general for one state or the lead prosecutor on a particular county or something, or wherever we're talking about a jurisdiction where somebody in charge is at the top and they're being convicted or accused or they're being investigated, they're going to bring in an outside source. So here we have South Dakota. This all happened in South Dakota. They're bringing in the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigations to help. This will help sort of alleviate the perception of bias or of a conflict of interest. In other words, we don't want South Dakota investigating South Dakota because if they do that, it's very likely that they're going to find, or at least there's going to be the perception that they're going to find that they did nothing wrong. It's like, hey, Robert investigated Robert and found he did everything excellent. So you just got to be cautious about that, and they're trying to eliminate that perception of bias. So let's go back to the report. However, he says, I want to respect the process and let it happen without any interference or appearance of impropriety on my part. However, it has come to my attention there are many rumors and stories being told and reported which do not represent a full and factual account of what happened. For this reason, I am issuing a statement, but will not answer questions about this matter until the official investigation is complete. So he goes on. This is just about a page and a half, so we'll go through it, and he's going to give us some additional facts. Now, I've highlighted some of the pertinent parts that I want to talk about here in red, so let's dive back into it. He says, this is the next part of Jason Ravnsborg, the Attorney General. This is his public statement. He says, on September 12, 2020, I attended the Spink County Lincoln Day dinner in Redfield, South Dakota. I arrived in Redfield about 4:45, which is right before the dinner started, and he left the dinner at approximately 9:15. You remember, on the schedule, they said that the dinner was going to be over at 8:30, and he presumably was doing some glad handing, hanging around a little bit afterwards, and so he says that he left right around 9:15, which does make sense when we start talking about the timeline. Remember, if he left at 9:15, and he had to drive about an hour and 10 minutes away, it makes sense that the accident happened at 10:30, and that coincides with the timeline as we know it thus far. He says, I consumed no alcoholic beverages before, during, or after the event while on my way back to Pierre. Shortly after leaving the town of Highmore, my vehicle struck something I believed to be a large animal, likely a deer. I didn't see what I had hit and stopped my vehicle. I stopped my vehicle immediately to investigate. I immediately called 911. So that's a second red underline. If he called 911, we should have evidence of that. There should be a 911 call recording. There should be actual data that the 911 call was made, both on his cell phone and both on the receiving end cell phone, on the dispatcher's end. There should be logs of that. And all of this should be on the record somewhere. We should get that call, and we should know more about it. So presumably he's telling the truth because he knows we can fact check this. We can look it up. We can see whether that exists or not. There was also some commentary that I've seen on the internet that, well, why did the sheriff report to the scene? Why did he? In other words, people are thinking that he just called the sheriff directly and he didn't call 911. Sounds like he did call 911, and we will be able to verify that. He continues, I looked around the vehicle in the dark and saw nothing to indicate what I had hit. All I could see were pieces of my vehicle lying on and around the roadway. Because it was dark and I didn't have a flashlight, I used my cell phone flashlight to survey the ditch, couldn't see anything. When Sheriff Volek arrived at the scene, he asked me if I was okay and surveyed the damage at the scene and to my vehicle. Sheriff Volek filled out the necessary paperwork to properly report the accident and gave me the tag that is required to get my vehicle repaired. At no time did either of us suspect that I had been involved in an accident with a person. Because my car was damaged too severely to safely drive, a wrecker was called. The nearest tow service that services Highmore area is out of Pierre. He advised me it would take well over an hour for them to get there. As a result, the sheriff graciously offered to loan me his personal vehicle so I could drive back to Pierre. We drove a short distance from the scene to his home. I borrowed his vehicle and arrived back in Pierre just before midnight. During the drive back to Pierre, I called my chief of staff and told him about the accident and the fact that I had borrowed Sheriff Volek's vehicle to drive home. He and I made arrangements to return the sheriff's vehicle the next morning. All right, so let's break this up in sort of layman's terms, because reading a paragraph can be sort of nauseating. Here's what happened. Jason Ravnsborg gets into the accident. According to his own statement, he says that he pulled over, stopped his vehicle because he just hit something big, and he calls the police. He calls 911. At that point, the dispatcher dispatches Sheriff Volek to go out to the scene. Sheriff Volek goes to the scene. They fill out some paperwork. They sign some tags. And Jason Ravnsborg says, my car doesn't work. What am I going to do? The sheriff says, hey, no problem. Let me take you back to my house, and I'm going to give you my personal vehicle. That way, you can just go on about your business. You can just head on in back home to Pierre, and then we'll deal with it the following day. You'll get a ride back. We'll consolidate whatever happens. That's where we're at right now. Couple things. Well, first of all, if this were you, if you were involved in an accident, would a sheriff drive you back home to their place and give you their personal car? Obviously not, right? That would not happen. Is this something that is a problem? Again, this is going to depend on how you view this case. If you view this as two police officers or two law enforcement officials or two people who work in the justice system just helping each other out, just saying, hey, you were in an accident. Looks like you need a ride. Tell you what, my house is 10 minutes from here. Just borrow my car for the night. No problem at all. We're in the middle of nowhere. There's no Ubers out here. So just take my car. Not a big deal. We'll catch up tomorrow and we'll fill out the paperwork and all's done. All's good. Everything's on the up and up. But if you're on the other side of that coin, what are you seeing here? You're seeing somebody in a high position of power. You're seeing the Attorney General. You're seeing somebody who is the chief law enforcement officer for that state. This person is responsible for all of the major prosecutions. It's a big deal. So to have a sheriff from a small town county go and spend time with this person, that is such a big thing. That would be like me going and hanging with one of the Supreme Court justices for the state of Arizona. It's not somebody I hang around a lot. This is somebody who's got a lot of tenure, a lot of experience, a lot of credentials, a lot of things that I don't have. And so that power imbalance is significant. It's massive. The Supreme Court, they're the ones who can say whether I can practice law or not. They can disbar me. They've got a lot of power and a lot of control over me. Sort of the same type of situation. Picture this with your boss or with your superior or with whoever runs your professional licensing. This is something that is a big deal. A sheriff meeting with an attorney general is not inconsequential. So when you have that power differential, you have a certain dynamic where one person is very powerful and the other is sort of a subordinate, and you're in the middle of the road and there's a potential for some criminality. There's a potential that the attorney general was drinking or was driving recklessly or was speeding or was on his cell phone or was doing something that was close to misconduct. But is the sheriff going to investigate that superior? Would somebody in that position say, listen, I know you're the attorney general. I know you're the highest, most prestigious elected position in the justice system that we have in our state, but I'm going to have to ask you to take this breath test. I'm going to have to ask you to walk and turn or stand on one leg or do a pen test or any of those things. Is that going to happen? If you're on the other side of that coin, you're going to say, definitely not. They're definitely not going to do a deep dive and really do a thorough investigation here, because if they did that, they could risk potentially losing their job or losing their political connections or losing their credibility just amongst the entire community in the Justice Department in South Dakota. So there's a lot at stake here. And when you see that a sheriff just gave another individual their personal car and did him a major favor in that regard, you start to wonder, or at least ask yourself, if you're on that side, what other favors were granted to Jason Ravnsborg on this particular night? Just speculation, we don't know. But Jason does go on, and he continues forward. He says, on Sunday morning, my chief of staff and I left Pierre at about 8 a.m. I drove to Sheriff Volek's vehicle to Highmore and filled the tank with gas. As we were driving to return the vehicle to Sheriff Volek's home, the debris field from my accident was still on the road, so my chief of staff and I stopped to see if we could find the animal that I thought I hit was in the ditch. As I walked along the shoulder of the road, I discovered the body of Mr. Boever in the grass just off the roadway. My chief of staff and I checked, and it was apparent that Mr. Boever was deceased. I immediately drove to Sheriff Volek's home to report the discovery, and he accompanied back to the scene. Once there, the sheriff instructed me that he'd handle the investigation, and he asked me to return back to Pierre. I have been cooperating fully with the investigation and have agreed to a search of both my cell phones, he's got two of them, provided a blood draw, and have given the investigators the names of anyone at the dinner who can confirm I was not drinking alcohol at any time during the event. I also sat down with the agents and investigating this matter and have provided them with a full face-to-face interview answering any and all questions that they have of me. And so on the face of this looks like a really solid statement, right? I mean, this guy is saying, it was just an accident. I'm being fully cooperative. I did everything that I could possibly do, and I'm cooperating. I'm totally innocent. There's nothing wrong that happened here. And on the face of it, certainly, I think you can agree with that. This sounds like a very good explanation. A couple interesting things we want to take a look at. Number one, it is interesting that he just returned right back to Sheriff Volek's home. So when he went back and he found the dead body, he didn't call anybody. He just turned around and drove over to Sheriff Volek's home. Yeah, a phone call to somebody could have helped. A phone call to 911, a phone call to the EMT, to 911. We have somebody here. I'm not sure how they confirmed that he was dead, but they did, and they called the sheriff. The sheriff is not an EMT. The sheriff is a sheriff. He's not somebody who comes and deals with dead bodies or anything. Now, certainly he would know how to handle this scene and handle this investigation, but there's a different way that this could have been handled. He could have called 911, could have called the non-emergency line, could have called somebody. I don't know how far away Sheriff Volek's home is, but he went over there, and that is just, it's a little bit. There are other ways that people could have handled the situation. Whether it's right or wrong, that's open to interpretation. But now let's talk about, before we get there, let's talk about the last paragraph of this letter. Nothing super substantive here, but we're going to see that he finishes. Jason says, "I'm deeply saddened by the tragic nature of the events, and my heartfelt condolences go out to the Boever family. As stated previously, I'm providing this information to try and dispel some of the rumors and innuendo that are being spread in the wake of this tragedy. That being said, I will not be answering questions at this time." There it is. "And will give this investigation the respect it deserves. Once the investigation is complete, I will make myself available to answer questions that may exist. However, I have a full faith in the thoroughness," and blah, blah, blah. They're all going to do a great job. All right. So that's his statement. It's his public statement, and it does answer, I think, a lot of the questions that people had about this case, but there are a few things that we still don't know quite yet. Now, the reason we're going through this analysis is because, in my opinion, if you were in this position, if you were not the Attorney General, if I was in this position, if my family, if my friends were in this position, I'm not real sure that the investigation would be kind of the presumption would have been so beneficial. It would not have been in our favor. In other words, they would have looked with a lot more scrutiny on us. And what do I mean about that? Well, let's talk about a few things specifically. So first and foremost, Jason says that he provided a blood draw, right? He says here in his letter, "I provided a blood draw." And many people think, well, that's great, right? He provided a blood draw. So he's obviously allowing them to test his blood to see if he was under the influence of alcohol or anything else. And that's great. We are going to see some blood results, but I can tell you this, there's not going to be anything in it. Of course, there's not going to be anything in it. Anybody, you don't have to be a lawyer to know this. If he had alcohol or he had an illegal drug in his system the night before, the likelihood that it's going to be in his body the day after or whenever they drew the blood. So if they drew the blood on Monday, that's really 2 days after the actual date of the accident occurred. So what is remaining in his blood at that point in time? Probably nothing. Let's take a look at this chart. So when we do DUI defense, we look at what's called an absorption phase, an elimination phase. We're looking at a graph, a chart that looks like this. And what we're talking about here is how a body absorbs and eliminates alcohol. So let's say, for example, that on this side we have the ethanol concentration in the body, so of the blood, how much alcohol is actually in your blood. This is the chart. This is the axis. So the higher up that your blood alcohol content is, the more alcohol is in your system, and this is what makes you feel drunk or feel buzzed. Your body is absorbing alcohol. So let's say, for example, you take one shot of vodka, and you just one shot, you ingest it, it goes into your stomach. This is what it's going to look like in your bloodstream. So as the alcohol becomes ingested, as it goes through your stomach, as your body processes it, and it enters into your bloodstream to cause that drunk feeling, this is what it looks like. So from the time it goes into your body, in your throat, down your esophagus, down into your stomach, you're going to see that your blood alcohol content actually rises up. This is what's called the absorption phase. At some point, your body is going to reach the maximum. It's going to reach the peak portion of the absorption, meaning there's no more alcohol left to absorb. That's going to be your peak. It's going to sort of plateau here. So many people will maintain this for a long period of time, right? They'll go out, they'll have some drinks, they'll get drunk, and they'll maintain this for a long period of time until they stop drinking. Then their body will start eliminating the alcohol. So this is what it looks like. And down here at the bottom, you have time, and this is just illustrative, but this is in hours. So you'll see that in 30 minutes, that first shot of vodka that you took, it should be pretty much fully absorbed in your body. But by the time a few more hours go by, that same shot of vodka is not going to be in your body anymore. It's going to be gone. Let me get rid of myself there. You see it's going all the way down to zero, meaning there is no more alcohol in your body. So when this Attorney General, Jason, says that he's going to come and give them a blood test. They're definitely not going to find any alcohol unless he was slamming a 12-pack of beer before he went and gave a blood test, which he's certainly not at this point in time. There is not going to be any alcohol in his blood. In Arizona, when we do DUI cases, they have a time limit. In other words, if you stop driving, they have to test your blood sample within 2 hours of the time you stopped driving. So they can't test you the next morning and say that you're drunk. They just can't do it. It needs to be close in proximity to the time of driving. So here, Jason Ravnsborg, the next day, there is not going to be any alcohol or any remnant of alcohol. Any testing that they can do to show that there may have been alcohol or to do what's called a retrograde extrapolation or a retrograde analysis, none of that. It's all out the window. It's all gone. There's not going to be any basis. Nothing is going to come from this blood that is alcohol related that's going to be useful in incriminating him on this regard. So the people who are asking that are or at least saying, what does the blood show? It's not going to show anything. Now, they could test the blood for something else. They could say, well, what else is in your system? Did you have any marijuana? Did you have any THC in there? Did you have any, any other illegal drugs like a cocaine or any, methamphetamines like Adderalls, any prescription drugs, any heroines, any of those? They can test for all of those, but it's going to really kind of be the same problem. When they do the analysis, they're going to look for active metabolites. So was there anything of a drug, any remnants of a drug that was active in your body at the time that you were driving? If they did the blood test a couple days later and Jason Ravnsborg may or may not have had anything in his blood, but if he did, just speaking hypothetically, 2 days later they test it, all of those active metabolites presumably should be gone. And so there's not going to be anything there for them to find or anything there for them to test. So while it's great, it's great that Jason Ravnsborg is being so accommodating and giving a blood sample, it really is, and he knows this, it really is, nothing's going to come of it, which is why he's being so forthcoming about it. There's nothing that they're going to be able to do with those blood tests. So that's point number one. Point number two is about the cell phones and about some of the other evidence that he said that he is going to disclose so willingly to the investigators. Let's talk about the cell phones specifically. So cell phones are always a very interesting piece of evidence in any criminal case or any criminal investigation. He said that he's going to give them over to the investigators. What does that mean exactly? Are the investigators just going to open it up and scroll through his text messages to see if he was texting and driving or calling and driving or interneting and driving, Facebooking and driving, whatever that is? Are they just going to open it and look through it to see what happened on that phone during this time? Or are they going to do a deeper dive into the guts of the phone? So there are all sorts of forensic expert witnesses and people that we use who are investigators who will take phones and really dive into the nuts and bolts of how they work. They'll dive into the operating system. They'll look at the logs, not the call logs that you can access through the user interface, but they will look at the logs. They can go in and see what was deleted, what was made, what are the records of everything that was going on if you give them permission to go through your phone, and they can access all your codes and they can unencrypt everything. Then there's a lot of data that they can get out of there. Your phone is just recording everything: temperature, gyrometer, GPS location, weather condition, everything. It's recording everything in there. So if you give them access to that, they can really do a deep dive. The question is, are they going to do that? So he's going to turn his cell phones over to them, but are they going to actually do a deep investigation? We're going to see. And they could also even go one step further, and they could cross-examine these records with the carrier provider itself. So whether they got Verizon, AT&T, or somebody else, they could easily look at the text messages and say, well, we don't see any text messages here on the device itself, but it's weird because the carrier logs show that there were text messages being sent. And so that can show that there was some malfeasance. In other words, the person with the cell phone deleted records off of the cell phone that have been preserved by the carrier. And we're going to see if that takes place, if they're going to do an analysis there or not. One of the phones, he had two phones, so I'm going to assume that one is a personal phone and one is a government phone. And that second government phone for sure should be something where a lot of those records are easily accessible. Then finally, the last thing that Jason Ravnsborg was talking about was this idea that there are other witnesses involved. Other witnesses were there at the event, and they can tell you and us and everybody that he wasn't drinking. He had nothing to drink at all. And we want to know who those people are, right? Are these people who are part of his campaign? Are these people who are part of his, who are donating to him? What's their possibility of bias? Is there anything that they could be doing that would indicate that they're, covering for him? How authentic, how credible are these witnesses, and who are they specifically? And it's more than just the witnesses in general. We're also talking about other aspects. Is there any security footage? Do we have any receipts? Are we also interviewing the bar staff? Did anybody serve him alcohol? These are the types of questions that you or I would very likely be getting if we were in his same position. So the question is also going to become whether his case is going to get that level of scrutiny. And then finally, kind of the last thing that we get in these types of cases is prosecutors are always looking at people's driving records to see how bad they are. What is a person's record, right? If you're involved in a serious accident, prosecutors will look back through your driving history, which can go back many, 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 many years or months. And if they see a lot of problems, then they can decide how that's going to influence their charging decisions. So if you have a really bad driving record and you're involved in an accident and somebody dies, maybe the prosecutor is going to be more inclined to say, maybe it's because you're just a bad driver. Maybe you were driving recklessly, or you were texting and driving, or you were breaking the law in some way that resulted in the accident. In this case, we also have some records that Jason Ravnsborg has a pretty bad driving record. Well, you can be the judge of that. Let's take a look. This story comes from Danielle Ferguson from Sioux Falls. From Argus Leader is the name of the website. It says the speeding tickets for Jason Ravnsborg range from January 2014 to September 2018. He pleaded guilty and paid a fine here for speeding in Beadle County in September 2018. Another one, pled guilty, paid a fine, April 2018. Cited for speeding on a four-lane road in Clay County in 2017. Pleaded guilty and paid a fine. Paid another fine in Falk County in May 2015. Speeding in Douglas County 2015. First infraction January 2014. And so the list goes on and on and on. Now, it's not to drag him through the mud on this stuff, but if somebody else was charged with the crime, this would be highly, highly pertinent because he's got a number of tickets right here to show that his driving is maybe not so good. And so maybe he had something to do with this actual accident, and it wasn't just the fact that a pedestrian was in the middle of the road. These questions come up, and if you're the Attorney General, they should be applicable to you just like they would be applicable to the rest of us. So let's take a look at some of the questions that are left open issues. Do we have any receipts? Do we have any transaction records from the bar or from Ravnsborg? Do we have security footage from the Roosters Bar and Grill? If there's security footage, we should see. He can confirm whether or not he, had even a single drink that night. The blood results are not going to confirm that. So if there's any external evidence, that would be helpful. Which specific witnesses were interviewed? So who specifically are we talking about? I know they keep saying there are witnesses, but can anybody come out and confirm he had nothing to drink that night? Let's see. When did Ravnsborg consent to the blood draw? When was it? Was it soon after? Did he give a blood sample that night, or did he give it 2 days later? It's going to be a big difference. One matters, one does not. When did he, nope, I already did that one. Pictures of Ravnsborg vehicle. So if he hit a deer, would it be one type of damage? If he hit a person, would it be a different type of damage? There's not a lot of deer in Arizona, in Phoenix, in Scottsdale, so I don't know how that works, but certainly I think it would be interesting to review. Cell phone records, were those searched and inspected? How did they cross-reference the carrier records? We already spoke about that. Was Ravnsborg driving a personal government vehicle, or a personal vehicle, or a government vehicle? If he was driving a government vehicle, many government vehicles are equipped with a bunch of other stuff. They're equipped with GPS trackers, and they're equipped with what's called AVL data, automatic vehicle location data, and a lot of that stuff should be accessible if the vehicle is equipped. And then we also want to know, at what point did Joe Boever die? So when they do the autopsy, the question is going to become, did he die instantly? Was this something that happened immediately when Ravnsborg and Sheriff Volek were outside? Was he still alive? Was Boever still alive? Because they pulled over immediately. Did they hear him? Did they see him? Did he die right then? What was the ultimate cause of death? Was it death upon impact, or was he dying for a certain period of time? I think that would also be interesting to know, because that may shed some light on whether they could have heard him, or whether he was shouting or anything like that. If the time of death was several hours later, maybe there was something that they could have seen or overheard or should have done differently based on that fact. Don't know, because it's just speculation at this point, but it will be curious to see moving forward. And then one final slide. So this is the timeline of events that we can sort of piece together, just stepping through this one at a time. So let's take a look. We had here the South Dakota GOP fundraiser event started at 5. The dinner time was at 6:30. We had the fundraiser end at 8:30. Then we had socializing, fundraising, and then we had Jason Ravnsborg leave at 9:15 p.m. The accident happened about 10:30, and then from there on, we really don't know much about the timeline or the time sequence moving forward. We know a little bit about it, but not some of the specifics. So when did Jason get out of the car and inspect the damage and confirm that it was a deer? Did he do that? Not really. He did get out of the car and inspect the damage. Was that immediately, or when did that happen? And then when did he call the police? So what was the specific time on that? When did the police arrive on the scene? When did they show up later? Did Ravnsborg return home? And if he did, what time was that? He returned to the scene of the crime the next morning. We can speculate that that was about 8 o'clock the next day. And then we also want to know, from that point forward, if that was at 8 o'clock, when did he inform Sheriff Volek about Joe Boever's body? When was that? And then when did the police respond back to the scene? So after he went and notified the sheriff, when did they return? Then when did he give the blood draw? And finally, was this a government or personal vehicle? And when was it impounded, and what are they finding in that vehicle? All of these questions would be stuff that we would be asking in a criminal case. If we were representing somebody who was under investigation for a vehicular manslaughter charge, or for leaving the scene of an accident, or for anything, for reckless homicide or vehicular manslaughter, or any one of these charges, these are the types of questions that we would be asking, and we would be looking at. Again, this case is new. It's forthcoming. There's going to be a lot more information to come here, and it's going to be open to interpretation. I think this one is more than many of the things that we talk about on this channel. People are going to see in this one exactly what they want to see, and I don't think that a lot of the facts are going to change. And so the real question is, what do you think? That's why we're doing this analysis. What do you think? So these are the facts that I have gathered from a number of different sources and tried to consolidate them in an objective way. But do those answer questions for you? If you started out on the one side thinking that there may have been some malfeasance, does Jason Ravnsborg, does his memo, does his public statement, does that satiate you? Does that answer your questions? Or is there still more to be left to be desired? Sound off in the comments. Let us know. Send us an email at tips@rrlawaz.com if you want to communicate that way, or drop a comment here on YouTube. And if you're not a regular on this channel, do us a favor, hit the subscribe button and share this with people who you think might find it useful or interesting. We do these deep dives to sort of help educate people about how the criminal justice system works, and we really want to hold those in power accountable. We want to watch the watchers. Jason Ravnsborg is somebody who prosecutes a lot of people. Now that he's in this situation, is he going to get any special treatment, or is the law going to be equally applied to him? Certainly hope that there's no criminality here. Certainly hope that this was just a big accident, a total misunderstanding, and that there was no malfeasance. And through the principle of charity and looking at everything in the best light possible, we're going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt on this one. I don't see anything that stands out here to say that there was actual malfeasance, but there are some questions. There are open questions, as there are in any criminal case, and so we want to hear from you. What do you think? Leave a comment, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you back here on the next one.